Welcome to my Sacred Revenge channel, where betrayal isn't just exposed, it's answered.
After 20 years of marriage, I, Evelyn Monroe, was blindsided. I truly believed I knew my husband David better than anyone. We had built a life together from nothing. We were young, ambitious, and convinced that we were going to conquer the world together. But on a cold Tuesday evening at the Willow Bistro, our favorite neighborhood restaurant, the man I had spent more than half of my life with dropped a bombshell that shattered absolutely everything I thought I knew. "I need space," David said, his voice as cold and detached as if he were discussing the weather. There was no emotion in his words, no hint of the man who had once promised to love me forever. My heart sank, a heavy, sinking feeling as I realized that the man I had loved for 2 decades was no longer the person sitting across the table from me. He had become a stranger. The timing couldn't have been worse. I had just been diagnosed with stage 2 breast cancer only a few weeks earlier. My world was already reeling, and I was desperately holding on to the hope that our love and our shared history would be the anchor that kept me from drifting away. But David was not there for me. Instead, he was distant, lost in his own world, preoccupied with his phone and his new pristine designer suit. 20 years just isn't working anymore, he said, his words as cold as a January morning as he looked away from me, staring at the condensation on his glass. I didn't need to ask for details. I already knew. But there was one thing I hadn't expected. I hadn't expected what would happen next. I had always been there for David. For 20 years, I had put my own life on hold to support his career, his dreams, and his ambitions. I had given up my own dreams of starting a custom handbag business, a business I had planned out in detail on every page of my old notebooks. I had sacrificed my own desires to help him climb the corporate ladder, managing our home, our social obligations, and our family life while he focused on his work. We had built a life together, one that looked perfect on the outside, a picture-perfect image of success. But beneath the polished surface, everything was slowly crumbling. As David's career flourished, so did the distance between us. He was a partner at his law firm. He was a respected member of the community. He was everything he had ever wanted to be. But the cost was our marriage. The signs had always been there, subtle at first. David's sudden obsession with his appearance. His new designer suits that he wore to the office every single day. The gym membership he actually started using, and the foreign cologne that smelled of sharp citrus and regret. All of these were little clues that something was changing, that our life together was shifting in a way that I couldn't understand. But I was so busy managing the life we had built. I was too busy to pay attention to the subtle shifts. I made excuses for him, telling myself that his long work hours were just a phase. I convinced myself that it was just the stress of his new position at the firm. I was wrong. Our conversations grew shorter and more superficial. His criticisms of me became sharper and more pointed. He spent more and more time on his phone, even during our rare dinners together. The once comforting moments we shared were replaced by awkward silences and disconnected glances. I was still doing everything I had always done, everything I thought he wanted me to do. But it wasn't enough anymore. I had noticed the changes, but I had convinced myself that we could still fix things. After all, we had built a life together, hadn't we? Before I begin telling you my story, let me know in the comments where you're listening from. But as I sat in my kitchen that night, after hearing the words, "I need space," I realized something that I couldn't ignore anymore. I wasn't the woman David had married. I had become a part of his life that he could easily push aside, like an old piece of furniture that no longer fit his new modern aesthetic. The discovery of the affair didn't come all at once. At first, it was a slow trickle of small things. A missed dinner, a text message with a name that didn't make sense, and then a lipstick stain on his shirt. I had always prided myself on being observant, but when it came to David, I had turned a blind eye. I was too focused on managing my own health, my radiation treatments, and my role in our life to notice the growing distance between us. But the lipstick stain was impossible to ignore. It wasn't mine, and it wasn't a mark I had ever seen before. My heart sank and my stomach twisted with a nausea that had nothing to do with my cancer treatments. I remembered a time when David's cologne was something that could make me smile, but now it was a constant, stinging reminder that he had become a stranger. I didn't confront him immediately. I wasn't ready for that, not yet. But the clues just kept adding up. There were the late-night phone calls he took in the garage, the expensive gifts he bought for Lauren, his new secretary, and the way he flinched whenever I touched him. I had become a ghost in our own home. It wasn't just the affair that hurt. It was the fact that David had stopped pretending to be in love with me. He had stopped pretending to care about our life together. Every day felt like a reminder that I was being left behind, that I wasn't a part of the life we had built anymore. Then came the credit card statement. I didn't need to look hard to find the evidence. There it was, in black and white. Charges. For restaurants I had never heard of, jewelry stores, and vacations to places I had never visited. All of it pointed back to David and Lauren. The final blow came when I finally asked, "Is there someone else?" My voice was steady and calm, though my heart was breaking into a million tiny pieces. David's hesitation was all the answer I needed. "Lauren," he confessed, his voice barely a whisper. "It just happened." Just like that, he reduced our 20 years together to something that had just happened. No apologies, no remorse, just a simple statement, as if our entire marriage had been a mere footnote in his pursuit of happiness with someone else. My world tilted on its axis, a sick, dizzying sensation. But I wasn't going to let David see how deeply his betrayal had wounded me. Not yet. Instead, I silently placed my napkin down on the table, stood up, and walked out of the Willow Bistro. I was done. My heart was broken, but my resolve was stronger than it had ever been. The divorce. Papers arrived exactly 1 week after I walked out of that restaurant. David had wasted no time. The papers weren't even from his own law firm. They came from a divorce specialist he had hired. Everything was already decided. The home would be sold, our assets divided, our personal property itemized with chilling, sterile precision. The entire process was businesslike, as if David were settling a routine transaction. I sat at my kitchen counter, the thick, heavy envelope sitting unopened in front of me for hours. My fingers hovered over the seal as the weight of the decision and the finality of David's actions pressed down on me. I could feel my heart racing, the anger and the hurt bubbling up to the surface, but I refused to let it control me. David thought he could take everything from me, including my dignity. But I was no longer the woman who had stood silently by his side for years. I was Evelyn Monroe. I opened the envelope slowly, the coldness of the paperwork contrasting with the warmth of the memory I had once cherished. As I read the details, I felt a quiet sense of power growing inside me. David had tried to erase everything we had built together, but there was one thing he hadn't counted on: my strength. I didn't immediately call a lawyer. I didn't shout or cry. Instead, I simply signed the papers. I agreed to everything he wanted without a single moment of hesitation. But what David didn't know was that this was my strategy. I wasn't surrendering. I was biding my time, waiting for the right moment to strike. When I sent the signed papers back to his lawyer, I did so with the quiet knowledge that this was not the end. I was playing the long game, and in that moment, I knew that my fight for justice was just beginning. "Are you sure about this, Evelyn?" My sister, Olivia, asked over the phone after I told her about my decision to sign the papers without a fight. I hesitated for a moment before answering. "It's not defeat, Olivia. It's a strategy. He thinks he's won, but he hasn't seen anything yet." As I moved forward with the divorce, I felt the weight of my decision heavy on my shoulders. I was a 45-year-old woman with a scary cancer diagnosis, no career, and a cheating husband, who was ready to leave me for a younger woman. My life felt like it was on fire, but I didn't know then that a twist was waiting for me, a twist that would change everything. 2 days after I had sent back the signed divorce papers, I received a call from Arthur Caldwell, my father-in-law. Arthur had always been a quiet, dignified man, someone who had treated me more like a daughter than his own son had since my mother had passed away. We had shared many lunches together over the years, our talks filled with his quiet wisdom and deep compassion. "Evelyn, I think it's time we had a talk," Arthur said, his voice serious and strained. I've been meaning to tell you something for a while now, but I didn't know how. I was completely taken aback. I had just started to process the pain of the divorce, and now Arthur wanted to share something important. I sat down on my kitchen chair, my heart racing. Was he going to tell me something about David? Was he going to defend his son? Was he going to offer me money out of pity? I had no idea what to expect. When we met for lunch, Arthur wasted no time. "I made a change to my will a few years ago," he said, looking directly at me. "And I think you need to know about it." I was stunned into silence. Arthur explained that he had added a secret clause to his will, a clause that David had never bothered to read. According to this clause, if David ever divorced me without clear evidence of my infidelity, he would forfeit his entire inheritance. Everything. The family business, the lake house in the Berkshires, a substantial personal estate, all of it would go to you, Evelyn. "Why would you do that?" I whispered, my voice filled with disbelief. Arthur sighed deeply, his expression softening with regret. "I watched David take you for granted over the years. I watched him prioritize his career and his social life over you. He never appreciated you the way he should have. He never saw your value, Evelyn. And I knew that one day he'd throw you away for someone younger, someone more convenient for his career. I wanted to make sure that if he did, he'd lose everything that he held most dear. And it's not just for the money. It's because I believe you deserve better, Evelyn. You deserve respect and a second chance at happiness." I sat back in my chair, processing this unbelievable revelation. It felt like a sudden shift in my reality. I had been betrayed, yes, but now I realized that David's betrayal was not just a personal affront. It was part of a larger picture, one that had been carefully planned by someone who had loved me and saw my value. For the first time in a long while, I felt a surge of strength. I wasn't just a woman who had been abandoned. I was a woman with the power to change everything. And now, with Arthur's will as my secret weapon, I was about to take back control of my life. My mind was made up. I had to act, and I would do it on my own terms. No more waiting, no more being the invisible wife. It was time to take control of my own future. And David had no idea what was coming for him. As my radiation treatments continued, I focused on regaining my physical strength. Each session, while draining, was a quiet reminder that I was fighting for my life, not just against the cancer, but also against the betrayal that had turned my world upside down. I spent hours planning my next move. I called on my closest allies, my sister Olivia, my old mentor Judith, and even a former law firm colleague of mine. I started working on securing my financial future, hiring a new financial advisor to help me navigate what would come next. But I wasn't just surviving, I was rebuilding myself. One afternoon, while driving home from the hospital, Olivia brought up something I hadn't considered yet: my last name. "You've been Evelyn Caldwell for 28 years, Olivia said carefully. "But before that, you were Evelyn Clark. Why not go back to that name? It's yours, after all." I paused, the idea settling into my mind. I had given up so much of myself over the years, but reclaiming my maiden name felt like reclaiming a piece of who I used to be, a woman with her own dreams and an identity beyond David. The very next day, I visited the courthouse. The paperwork felt empowering as I asked the clerk to restore my name. "Evelyn Clark," the clerk said as she stamped the form. It wasn't just paperwork. It was my first act of defiance. With that, I decided I was done hiding behind the shadows of my failed marriage. I wasn't just going to be a passive participant in my own life anymore. And then came the Instagram post. I was scrolling through my feed when I saw it. David, with his secretary Lauren, smiling at a table in an exclusive restaurant, and a photo of an engagement ring with the caption, "We said yes." That ring, it was so familiar. I recognized it instantly. It had once belonged to my grandmother, a beautiful, unique piece of jewelry that David had always dismissed as outdated. But now Lauren was wearing it, proudly displaying it for the world to see. The engagement was fast, much faster than anyone had expected after our divorce. I felt a cold anger rising in my chest, a rage I hadn't felt before. But it wasn't just the engagement that hurt. It was the fact that David had moved on so quickly. trying to erase me from the picture completely. But I had one more card to play. David didn't know it yet, but everything he thought he had secured was about to slip away from him forever. The moment had arrived. I had spent weeks planning for this confrontation, and I was finally ready. I had never felt stronger or more in control. My cancer treatments had ended, and my doctors were telling me that my prognosis was good. My finances were in order, and I had made peace with the life I was about to rebuild. But the final step required one last act of bravery. One last face-to-face meeting with David. The location was set. Willowbrook Cottage, the family vacation, home in the Berkshires. It was the very place where David had proposed to me all those years ago, the place where we had once dreamed of a future together. It was fitting that it would be here, where everything had started, that everything would finally end. As I drove up the winding road toward the cottage, my thoughts weren't filled with anger or bitterness. No, this wasn't about that anymore. It was about justice. It was about reclaiming the years I had lost. It was about standing tall in front of the man who had betrayed me and making sure he understood the full extent of what he had done. It was about a future that was finally mine again. When I arrived, David was already there, standing outside, looking a bit out of place in his expensive business suit. He hadn't expected this. He had expected a quiet meeting to finalize the division of assets, maybe some awkward silence, and certainly no confrontation. But I wasn't there to beg or plead for him to come back. "I didn't expect you to show up, Evelyn," David said, his voice uncertain, as though the situation was already slipping from his grasp. I walked up to him, holding the manila envelope that would change everything. "You didn't think I'd come, did you?" I said, my voice steady, but filled with a new, quiet power. "You thought you could leave me with nothing. But I'm not the woman you left behind anymore, David." I handed him the envelope. David took it, confused, as he flipped it open. His eyes widened as he saw the contents. Arthur Caldwell's will. The clause that David had never bothered to read was now in black and white. "I knew about the will," I said, my gaze unwavering. "What you didn't know was that Arthur foresaw everything. He knew what you'd do, and he made sure you'd lose everything if you ever treated me like this." David's face drained of all color as he read the clause over and over again. His mouth opened in disbelief, but no words came out. "You thought you could erase me," I continued, my voice growing stronger with each word. "You thought you could walk away with your new life and leave me with nothing. But now, I hold all the power, David. You never read the fine print, and now you'll pay the price for underestimating me." The silence between us stretched long and heavy. In that moment, I knew I had won. Not just the battle for my inheritance, but the battle for my own self-worth. David's world, built on a foundation of lies and betrayal, was crumbling before him. I felt no joy in his discomfort, but I couldn't deny the satisfaction of seeing him finally face the consequences of his own selfish actions. I turned to leave, my heart full of a quiet, peaceful triumph. "I don't need your money, David. What I need is my freedom, and I'm finally getting it." I left the cottage with my head held high. I wasn't the broken woman who had walked into that marriage all those years ago. I was stronger, wiser, and finally ready to reclaim my life. As I drove away, I realized that I had done more than just take revenge on David. I had freed myself from the past. I was no longer defined by him or our broken marriage. I was Evelyn Clark once more, and I was ready to start the next chapter of my life. My journey wasn't just about getting even with David. It was about finding my own strength in the face of incredible betrayal. It was about reclaiming my identity and my future when everything I thought I knew had been ripped away from me. The truth is, we all face moments in life when we are tested, when things seem impossible, and when the people we trust the most let us down. But it's in those moments that we can choose to stand tall, to fight back, and to rebuild. My story is a reminder that no matter how difficult the journey, we have the power to reclaim our lives, our dignity, and our happiness. Don't let anyone else define your worth. And when you face betrayal, remember that you can rise from it stronger than you ever were before. If you have ever been betrayed or felt like you've lost everything, remember my story. The fight isn't always about getting revenge. It's about getting your life back. Like, share, and comment if you believe in second chances. Remember, your story is yours to rewrite.